should have put you down myself. Personally.
You know, I never understood that. Why did you judge me? Why did you judge me?
You killed innocent people.
The means to an end.
You started a massacre.
I caused the revolution.
You betrayed the law!
Law! I betrayed this! Your council's experiment, which failed!
Yeehaw! Larken Rose here. Convenient thing about Facebook Live is if I have half a thought, but I don't want to bother writing it out, I can just start randomly ranting into camera. This thing came up because in my news feed, as I'm scrolling down, and I get 8 billion things in my news feed, some story about a cop, a video surfaces of a cop, punching some teenage girl in the face several times because they're at a party or something, and there's video of it, and of course the cops lied about what happened, and then the video came out, and no, that isn't what happened. So they arrested her for assaulting a public servant or something by apparently hitting him in the fist with her face. But it brought to mind something that is worth a random rant, which is when people see somebody in a uniform, when the average people and statists see somebody in a uniform, they sort of think, oh, that's a police officer, instead of that's a person in a costume. And I've talked about this a million times. Other people have talked about that a million times. But it's like they actually forget that they're people. So these, the people are like, well, I don't necessarily trust strangers, so I want, and they might be armed, they might be scary, they might be unstable, so I'm glad police are around to protect me. Well, the police are strangers too, unless you live in a dinky little town, and they're strangers with guns. And so if you trust them more because they have a badge and a uniform, that's just inherently stupid. Because having a badge and uniform and supposed authority is a huge reason to not trust them. It's basically if you're out, wandering in some city somewhere, and it's late at night and there's a bunch of strangers around. It's like, well, I don't, most of these people are probably perfectly fine and good and stuff, but I don't know, never can tell when one's going to be nasty. And then you see one and realize, oh, okay, the powers that be aren't going to do anything to him if he beats the crap out of me. I feel so good and safe now that he's around. Like, when you see someone with a badge and a uniform, that's when you should be most scared and nervous, because not only are most people going to take his side if he decides to beat the crap out of you, make something up, and then kidnap you, and most people are going to take his word for it, but there is no law that's going to do anything to him if he just outright assaults you. So he's the last one you have any protection from within the supposed system, and if you defend yourself against him, that is the worst possible scenario. Like anybody else, if you have the means to defend yourself, whether with your fists or a gun or whatever, the average thug on the street, like, you might have a chance against. The average cop, good luck, because they have this entire massive gang and massive establishment behind them to A, lie about what happened, and then B, send in lots of people with guns to beat the crap out of you or cage you or prosecute you or anything else. But it's so weird the way people, they express their distrust in humanity, which I can understand that much, but then they follow it up by saying, so it makes me feel better when some of these humans I distrust have lots of firepower, a huge gang behind them, no personal responsibility, permission to treat me like crap, and a gigantic system that isn't going to do anything to them if they commit a crime against me. I feel so safe and secure knowing he's there. It's literally, if I see a cop driving down the street, I'm more worried than if I see, somebody from a street gang walking down the street or driving down the street. Because if I have my gun, well, the street gang guy, he's probably not going to mess with me, unlike the cop. Because they don't just they'll extort people and rob people. They don't nearly rob as many people a day as cops do. Cops have a quota. I don't know, do street gangs have quotas of, wait, you only robbed 20 people today? Come on, you're out of our gang. Get out. That's literally what the street gang known as law enforcement does. Is there's a certain, and they all pretend not to, and they all totally do it. There's a certain number of people you have to rob this day or week or month or however they time the quotas. Now you get out there and start robbing the crap out of people, and if you don't, you're fired. So the cops rob way more people, steal way more property than anybody else, and resisting them is way more difficult. And so for anybody to feel safer because a mere human being, stranger that they don't know, with a gun, has a badge and a uniform and permission to be a control-free butthead and a giant gang behind them, it's just so silly. And more people are learning that the hard way. And thanks to cell phones and cameras everywhere, lots of the world is learning the hard way. Wow, these are just people, and they're not stable. Generally speaking, they're not any more stable than the rest of society. They're not any more intelligent than the rest of society. How many jobs do you know that actually require you to be a certain amount of stupid? And if you think I'm making that up, look up the stories about how some police departments have upper end IQs. If your IQ is above a certain thing, they won't hire you. I'm not kidding. Look it up. So how many jobs? Oh, sorry, you're too smart. Get out of here. So the cop, he's just a person to begin with. He's a stranger. He's probably not that more intelligent than the average person out there, and the average person is not that intelligent. He's probably not any nicer. He's probably not any more self-restrained. He's probably So when you see a video of some cop just, the girl probably said something to him that called him a pig or something. I don't know. They're not that at all justifies. I'm trying to guess why he just decided to punch this girl in the face. She didn't assault him at all. Probably just a short-tempered, power-happy asshole. And he happened to have a badge and a uniform, which makes him way more dangerous. As demonstrated by the fact that after beating the crap out of her, the first thing they did was kidnap her and charge her with assaulting a public servant. And then the video comes out that shows, no, her crime was you just beating the crap out of her when she hadn't done anything to you. But, so they're just people. And if, one of the things I'm thinking of sticking this into the sequel to the Iron Web, is people sneak microphones and cameras into cop cars illegally, because if the average person could hear and see what a lot of cops do on a daily basis, they'd see, wow, not only are these just people, they're not any more trustworthy, and they're not any more self-controlled or responsible. They're psychos. In fact, with the whole steroid thing that so many cops are on and looking for a fight that so many cops do, just they're way less trustworthy than just the average person you're going to meet in the street. And so there's that. I'll move on to one thing, and then I'll back up and go into the comments and see if I can keep up. So there's that. There's cops. Why the hell would you trust them? Now, the only way you could possibly make the situation worse is put them in a scenario where they can all the way commit murder. There's very likely to be no record of it, and it's almost certain that nothing is going to happen to them if they all the way commit mass murder. That is a description of the U.S. military. You give these people who don't even have to be qualified to the degree to be a cop, you give them a machine gun, you stick them on the other side of the world, you tell them to boss people around, they assault people, they commit extortion and rape and torture and murder, and what's the likelihood that anybody's going to care or anybody's going to know about it, other than their victims, of course, and then their family members and stuff? And so, and this is a thing I've pointed out before, that, okay, if you're on the other side of the world killing people for politicians, we'll give you a machine gun. But if that same person comes back to the U.S., you can't be trusted to have a gun, especially if you're acting on your own. If you're using your own conscience, hell no, we don't want you to have the ability to use deadly force. But if you're blindly following the orders of politicians to kill people on the other side of the planet, oh, have at it. Well, not only will we give you a machine gun, we'll give you a freaking tank, a bomber, and all sorts of stuff to blow people up, because then we don't give a crap. to expect, and you know, from the segment of society that's responsible for most of the violent crime, which is young men. And there are women in the military, but still mostly men. And so a whole bunch of young men, heavily armed, in a place where there's almost no responsibility for their actions. They're told to be violent. Like, they're the worst, you know, as far as statistics are concerned, they're the worst segment of society to begin with when it comes to violence. And they know that they can do almost anything and get away with it. Often they're encouraged to be sadistic bastards, to show them who's boss and stuff, and the whole indoctrination and demonize and dehumanize the enemy. You know, all these things add up to, of course they're going to commit murder, of course they're going to terrorize people and torment people and do evil crap. And the idea that, oh, people, you assume that a soldier, oh, that's so noble and worthy and he's fighting for... Why the hell would you assume that about somebody who's a stranger just because he went and joined the military? You know how low the threshold is to get led into the military? There almost isn't one. It's what people do who can't figure out anything productive to do, is they go into the military. So you get a bunch of dumb, violent, you know, young men. It's not only them, but there's a lot of them that join the military. You give them a gun, you send them to the other side of the world, you tell them to boss people around and occasionally kill people, and they know damn well that there's almost never going to be a situation in which something bad is going to happen to them because they all the way commit murder. If it happens to get caught on video, that's one thing, but how many Iraqis carry cell phones and camcorders compared to Americans? You know, I know some of them do, but in friggin' Syria, I kind of doubt it's less than in the U.S., So the likelihood that this segment of society, that's just strangers, they're just average people, they didn't take a magical goodness pill to get into the military. If anything, they took the exact opposite. And yet people assume that those in the military deserve respect and that they should be believed before other people. They and cops should absolutely be disbelieved before almost anybody else and distrusted before almost anybody else, because they're in a position where they have this authority that makes it so, A, they can do evil crap, and they're even supposed to do a certain amount of evil crap, and the stuff they're not technically supposed to do, they're almost certainly going to be able to get away with in the vast majority of cases. And to look to them to be a calming influence on society and to protect you from the bad people out there is just so obviously stupid. Before you even see a single story, before you know any of the specifics or any of the details or anything, to expect the cops and soldiers to be good people doing good things is just stupid. If you understand the situation they're in, and if you understand what the belief in authority does to people, you make people into monsters, and then you tell everybody else that we should worship and adore them. And then you wonder why, these horrible things happen, and then they come back and they're suicidal, or they don't fit into society because they're violent psychos and they, beat up their partners and all the nasty things they do. So it's so weird that, you put on a uniform, now you're this magical thing that we think is good for some reason, even though without it, you'd just be somebody in a segment of society that we probably wouldn't trust that much. But now we magically trust you because you qualified to get a badge and a uniform, which takes almost nothing. So, just thought I'd randomly rant that. Now I'm going to see if I can back up and read some of these comments. It tends to do the thing where the comments go flying off the page. Don't forget unlimited stolen funding. So they're not even just beating you up with their stuff. They get paid day in and day out to beat people up and boss people around. They don't need to do anything productive to get a customer to willingly pay them. They just rob people, and they drive around in cars that their victims paid for, and they carry guns that their victims paid for, and they have their buddies whose salaries their victims paid for. So that's just to think that to expect them to be better than the average person. Like if I'm walking down a dark alley late at night, the last stereotype of person in the world I want to meet is somebody with a badge and a uniform. Literally, I would rather meet anybody before any other segment of society before somebody with a badge with a uniform. But but people still think, well, it's fewer and fewer people, because more and more people are either experiencing it themselves or seeing videos of what cops actually do in real life. Don't escalate against empowered armed psychopaths with permission to kill you. Yeah, on a practical basis, it's a fairly bad idea. Somebody correcting the spelling. I don't care. Half my mail gets my names backwards and stuff, but I don't get offended by people misspelling my name. Yeah, absolutely. They don't want smart cops because they might not listen, and that totally is the actual reason they don't. And their excuse for like, well, this, if you're too smart, if your IQ is too high, this job might not be like stimulating enough for you. And no, what they mean is you might actually think about stuff and figure out, wow, this is ridiculous and evil, and I'm going to not only quit and run away, but I'm going to tell people what's going on. Whereas the people, this will offend some people, but guess whether I give a crap. The people who most gravitate towards being in a gang are people who, on their own, feel insufficient and insecure and weak and stupid and like they join a gang to feel like something important because by themselves they don't. And it doesn't have to be stupid, it can just be uneducated and they have no skills and they don't have an education. It's like, well, I don't know how to make any money and I feel weak, and especially if they, live in a dangerous neighborhood or something, and so they feel vulnerable, and so they join a gang. And it isn't always they join the gang to go do nasty stuff. Sometimes it's they join up because they feel insecure. But then you have a gang of young men who's like, oh, look how strong we are now, and we're uneducated and unskilled and sort of obnoxious and whatever else. What do you think is going to happen? And giving them badges and uniforms isn't going to make that not happen. It's going to make it happen even more because they know they can get away with way more. And there was another story recently. I mean, there's an infinite number of these. I don't know why I bother to mention any single one anymore, where a cop was caught drunk driving and swerving around at a bazillion miles an hour, and they just let him go. And the other cops were hoping that nobody would notice, but it came out in the records or on video or something that is, yeah, you're swerving around like a psycho, but go ahead. And we'll let you get back in your car and drive drunk some more. The fact that anybody still trusts them, like they really do, most people really do view them as if they're something other than people. Like, well, now he's not a guy. He's not just a guy. If he was a guy with a gun, I'd go, ah! But no, he has a uniform, so he's this magical thing. And I know people before have joked about, well, maybe they've done it, I don't know, joked about calling 911 and saying, there's a man with a gun in here, referring to the cop. Because that's all he is. He's a man with a gun. Only, it's not even that good. He's a man with a gun who thinks he has the right to rule, which is way worse than a random stranger. If I see a random stranger with a gun, I don't even care. Like, and partly this is cultural. A lot of people grew up where, there aren't, normal people don't have guns, and in Hollywood they see the only people who have guns is law enforcement and the bad guys, so people sort of get scared of them because there's always an association to that. And I grew up that way. I didn't grow up in the gun culture, but then I was around it and have been around it a lot. And now I see random strangers carrying guns. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Unless they have a badge and a uniform, because then I immediately know he thinks he has the right to boss me and everybody else around. That makes him scary. That immediately makes him a threat to me and everybody around. And it makes it way more dangerous to resist him or try to stop him if he's a violent bastard, which they often are. So they're more likely to be a violent bastard, and it's less likely you're going to be able to do anything about it without getting caged or shot. Somebody mentioned hiring combat veterans. So you take the second scenario, which is the worst scenario possible, and they come home and they're all messed up, having been trained to be violent and inhuman, and then you say, oh, welcome home, have a badge and uniform, go boss people around. And by the way, make sure you steal a certain amount of money. You issue a certain amount of tickets in the next month. Like, what do you think is going to happen? So, yeah, so they're combat trained, and like that's really the people who were spending all their mind in the mentality of violent combat. That's who you want being peacekeepers, which, hardly anybody even calls them that anymore because it would be so laughable. Oh, whoops, comment ran away. Stephanie said, how do you personally make peace with your local community when police worship is an all-time high? I kind of don't. It's funny because I'll just blatantly say I don't nearly trust the police. They're just another street gang. And there's a number of people who go, oh, and I just go, well, like, you're allowed to freak out about that. I'm still going to say it. But then a lot of other people, and a growing number of people, will go, yeah, they kind of are. So, and I never, like, I'm to the point where if somebody's horribly offended, I'll say, well, we can talk about it and I can prove it. I don't really care if you're offended. I'm going to say if they're a street gang, because what they do is drive around robbing people. Like, have you ever seen a cop saving a good guy from a bad guy? No. Have you seen them by the side of the road stealing people's money for having the wrong sticker on their car? Yes, constantly. You always see that all the time because that's what they actually do. And if somebody made a realistic cop show, it would be boring and infuriating because mostly you would see them fishing for reasons to steal money from people who didn't hurt anybody or threaten anybody. Oh, all right, let's scroll down. Yeah. And Amanda is here. And because... yeah, and they come back. Not only were they trained into combat, but they come out all traumatized and depressed when they figure out what they were doing over there was basically being terrorists. And some refuse to admit it to themselves. Some admit it and say, yeah, we weren't, like, I was guarding the poppy fields, or I was randomly harassing people I didn't know and kicking in their front doors. And that, that majorly messes people up. And then they come home and you give them a gun and a badge and say, here, boss these people around. Like, how well do you think that's going to work? And I know, I've mentioned this before, but I know some former cops who were cops ages ago who say they can't stand cops now because they remember a time, and this may never have been true in big cities, but in smaller towns, they say, I remember a time when we were actually like peacekeepers. And our goal was to settle things down and to smooth things over and to, keep everything quiet. We weren't like looking for excuses to arrest and fine people. They were pretty close to what would exist in a free society, not as law enforcers, but as there's a guy with a gun I can call if I feel like I'm being threatened, and they show up, like threat management center up in Detroit. If anybody hasn't heard of that, look up the video and listen to their the founder, I forget his name. Sorry, I suck at names. Describing their philosophy, and it's exactly what should and would exist in a free society. Is a bunch of people with guns who know combat. They're really good at combat, and they're even better at making it so they never need to be good at combat. Like, they don't show up with, all right, who can I beat the crap out of? They show up with, how do we settle this down and calm things down and make it so no violence is necessary? I mean, if violence is necessary, we have the ability, we have the know-how, but we try not to do that. And that's not at all how cops function. They immediately escalate things. Sometimes, like I started with, some teenage girl at a party, they escalated to her being punched in the face in the span of a tenth of a second. Well, good thing you called in the peacekeepers. They helped loads. Okay, somebody's saying sometimes it's the person behind the badge is okay. It's the job that's bad. Yes and no. I think a number of people join with good intentions, but you cannot, if the measure of a good person is behaving morally, you cannot be a good person and be a cop anymore. The job requires you to initiate violence in the name of whatever arbitrary whims that politicians decide to call law. So if you join up with good intentions and they say, all right, here are all the things you have to go rob people for and issue a ticket for that and threaten to cage that person for having the wrong plant and this, that, and the other thing, your choices are either stop being a good person or quit. If you keep being a cop and manage to not get fired, you can't be a good person anymore. You can have started with good intentions. So in one sense, yeah, the job is bad, but if somebody sticks with it, that requires the somebody to be bad, whatever their initial intentions were. And then there's immediately no reason to trust them. Yeah. Sorry, comments jumping around. Matthew saying, there's lots of people who've been who experienced police abuse firsthand, but they still support the police. And there's this mentality. Well, that's an exception. It's just it's a bad apple. And I won't go into that. I've talked about that a million times. Of how is it that all the good apples never do anything about the bad apples? And I point that out in videos, in police abuse videos. I point to, look at the other cops, and you can go do this. This is a mental or philosophical exercise, is watch a bunch of police abuse videos, but instead of focusing on whichever cop is beating the crap out of somebody, look at all the other cops. See if they, A, are doing anything to stop it, or B, look the slightest bit surprised at what's going on. Do they look like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my... Or they look like, oh yeah, Bubba's beating the crap out of somebody again. Hey, Bubba, can you kind of say, whatever, I have to back you up. Like, so where are these good apples? Because in these videos of the bad apples, how come they're surrounded by other apples that aren't doing anything to stop it and don't look at all surprised by what's going on? So, yeah. But yeah, like Matthew said, even people who are personally victimized think, well, that cop was bad. But police in general are, like, how many individual examples do you need of getting beat up on before you stop saying the equivalent of, well, that gang member that committed assault and murder and extortion, he was bad. But the Bloods and Crips in general are good. And the funny thing is, I actually think that's more likely to be true, that there can be street gangs that are actually good and moral and legitimate. And I mean, I doubt it happens very often, but at least it's theoretically possible. I'm doing a Facebook Live, but you don't have to be particularly quiet or anything. So I wasn't talking to you, in case you couldn't guess it. But there can be gangs where it's just, a bunch of people are like, we're actually scared because of the scary violent gangs and we want to group together for self-defense. Cops are never that, because they're required to be law enforcers, which means literally if they only defended people from aggressors, they would get fired. If you're a cop and all you do is defend against actual aggressors, you're going to get fired because your job requires you to enforce every law. And the quotas are specifically about go rob people who didn't threaten or harm anybody because they drove 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, or they didn't have the right sticker, or their windows were tinted too much, or years ago I got to sit in a New Jersey frickin' courtroom about the tree that I took down, which I beat. They had to throw the case out. But I can't even count how many cases there were of tinted windows where they're doing this conveyor belt of robbing people because their windows, you couldn't quite see through them enough. Like, wow. So that's a reason to kidnap and rob somebody. Lovely. So they're constantly just fishing for reasons to rob people. And it's possible, I don't know how likely, but it's possible for an average street gang to not do that, to mostly mind their own business and actually sort of benefit their neighborhood. Not that I think most of them do, but at least it's theoretically possible, whereas it's not possible for law enforcers to just be defensive because their job requires them to be offensive and aggressive. Les says, a good cop has a backseat full of cops. Yep, and then immediately he's fired, and it was, Josie made the point that she wants more bad cops, because a bad cop means one who doesn't do what the other cops expect. A bad cop is one who arrests the other cops when they do evil crap. But that hardly ever happens, and when it does, they immediately get vilified, and they get death threats, and they get everything else because they've gone against the street gang. Yeehaw. Yeah, and Jim brings up the thing of the, if there's 3 cops beating somebody up and 9 standing around watching, those 9 are support. Even if they're like, well, I didn't hit anybody. You also didn't stop it, and you obviously created a deterrent to anybody resisting. So if somebody says, well, if to get out of here I have to shoot all 12, I think that's completely justified. It probably won't go well on a practical basis, but I think it's completely justified if you have to resist the 3 that are attacking you and the 9 that are spectating, because it's a safe assumption that if you start resisting, those 9 spectators with badges are going to become aggressors too. And so, but in so many of those videos, the cowardly thugs watching are an indication of what cops are actually like. You can't pretend it's a few bad apples when all the other apples just stand there and watch. At best, they stand there and watch. At worst, they join in the evil crap. And let's see. Yeah, Matthew mentioning the thing that there are things that most people realize, like, well, if the cop's doing this, if anyone else did that, that's totally and obviously wrong and immoral, but it's a cop, so it's okay, and you should go along with it, and you should cooperate, and, all the memes of why don't you, instead of saying, fuck the police, why don't you just obey the law? And there's memes of, like, Nazis harassing a Jew, or, Jesus being nailed to the cross. Why don't you just obey the law? But that mentality that cops are allowed to do things that normal people aren't, that's one of the reasons they're so freaking untrustworthy, and you shouldn't nearly feel safe around them, because they basically have societal permission to be violent aggressors. Let's see. So that might be enough of a rant. I'll sort of skim along and see if anything else jumps out at me. I don't know if I'll nearly be able to catch up. Whoops, my computer is now freaking out. So, but that's the general point. And it's, as more and more videos come out, it'll be harder and harder for people to for more people to ignore the reality of what these people are. And they're just people, only they're not even just average people, cops and soldiers. They're average people that now have every incentive to be way worse than average people, and way more violent and dangerous, and soldiers especially. So it's funny because, and I don't know why this is, maybe I'll have to ponder it and then do another rant about it. But I know a lot of former soldiers who are now anarchists. I only know a few former cops who are now anarchists, which is weird because to me, being a soldier is several steps worse and less responsible. And it's, a whole lot higher percentage of soldiers have actually committed murder than cops. Most cops just sort of run around robbing people. Most cops don't even draw their firearm, I think, in their whole career. They just pull people over and steal a little bit of money from them. Whereas soldiers are sort of, way more of them, if they've seen combat, they've threatened or shot at people and stuff like that. So to see more of them give it up, maybe it's because the violence and the evil there is so blatant that more people go, wait, what are we doing? This is horrendous. And that makes it easier for them to doubt it. I don't know. But I do see a lot more former soldiers becoming anarchists than former cops. Although I do know some former cops too. There was a former soldier. Oh, hey, it's Paula. She was at a Candles in the Dark thing. Oh, speaking of which, why didn't I mention that? The Candles in the Dark for New Hampshire is now set for I think it's July, I'm totally going to get this wrong. No, July 15th and 16th in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire, which is, I think, it's just south or just southeast of Keene, New Hampshire. So if you go to larkenrose.com and go to the store, you'll see the seminars listed there. And I hope in the next day or two I will be listing the one in Denver, Colorado, you can already get. Oh, sorry. I'm a scatterbrain right now. The one in New Hampshire isn't on the website yet, but it has been confirmed. The one in Denver, Colorado, you can get Denver, Colorado in September. you can already get tickets for. The one in New Hampshire and the one in Pennsylvania and the one in Washington State should all be announced and for sale in the next day or two, because they're all lined up now. Just need to double check and confirm some things, and then that'll be going. I can't remember what brought that up. Oh, Paula mentioning that she used to be a soldier. Yeah, and there are a lot of them. I mean, I've lost count of how many people. And it may just be a numbers thing. Maybe there just are so many more people in the armed forces. Yeah, Jason's saying that his dad was a cop for a bazillion years, for 20 years, and never had to draw his gun. That's true of most cops. Not true of most soldiers on the front line. But maybe it's just a numbers thing that so many more people are in the armed services. I'm not going to call them that. So many people are mercenaries of the state that just statistically more of them are likely to turn into anarchists. But it does seem that a lot can all the way shift over to seeing the stupidity down to its core, where cops don't seem to do that as often. Again, I know some who did, but it's not that many compared to soldiers, including Marines. Like, if you can go to if you can go through the indoctrination process that they put Marines through and still hang on to enough individuality and thought to turn into an anarchist, that's pretty dang impressive. Hey, here, oh no. It jumped away. Where'd it go? Oh, I found it. Larken, former officer here. This is Paul. Took me a solid 8 years to realize that my profession was your oppression. Well put. Yeah, and it's because, you know, if you're constantly surrounded, and that's the thing, and this is another topic. I'll just quick mention this. I'll have to do another thing about this. The whole topic, I was having a discussion with Amanda about this, the thing of when is it, you know, ideally you want to talk to somebody's, you know, the real them inside and appeal to their humanity and stuff. At some point, I don't at all mind resorting to shaming or guilting or threat. Like if there's a guy coming at me with an axe, I'm not going to appeal to his heart. I'm going to appeal to his not wanting to have his head blown off to stop him from doing that. But there's sort of the question of like, how long should you wait and how hard should you try to, you know, connect with their humanity and stuff. And I think one of the reasons that it can be good, it can actually be helpful, even for the cop, much less humanity in general, for them to feel even hatred. I don't think hatred's ever a good thing, but this is sort of a side benefit. If the cops feel hated by everybody, that may just make them, you know, group tighter, but it may make them feel bad if they were good people, like, I'm trying to help, why does everybody hate me? But if, you know, the Paul, I think it was, who was a cop and said it took him 8 years to figure it out. If you're not only surrounded by other cops saying, we're the good guys, but you're surrounded by victims and most of them go, rah, 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 thank you so much for being here. Like, why would you ever doubt it? Like, if you're one of the king's guards and the people you oppress and rob go, we're so happy you're here, like, what's the incentive to ever question it? Whereas if everybody goes, you totally suck, we hate you, then at least you might, if you're a good person, you might have reason to think, why does everybody hate me? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And that's one of the reasons why the turnover rate, or, you know, why it's so hard for police departments to keep staffed and to find new people who want to be cops. One of the factors, and they've admitted this, one of the factors is that so many people hate cops that fewer and fewer people want to be them. It's sort of like the turnover rate of the IRS has always been ridiculous, because as soon as you're an IRS agent, everyone in the world pretty much hates you. So it stresses them out and they quit at an amazing rate. Not a high enough rate if you ask me. But obviously, ideally, I would rather have people, you know, persuaded in a nice, understanding way to give up the violent aggression. But it's sort of undeniable that in some cases, shame and intimidation and guilt make some people go, I don't want to do this anymore because everybody hates me. And obviously, that's not the ideal solution. But I know some people that happened for and it worked for. And oddly, for their own sake, I'm sort of glad that people were nasty enough that made them uncomfortable enough to think about it. And I've had former soldiers thank me for being as nasty as I was, which sounds weird, because they've told me, I'm not sure I ever would have questioned it if somebody wasn't all the way in my face saying, you're the terrorist, you're the violent psycho. And it's different for different people, and again, ideally, that's not how human beings would have to interact. And if there's a way to win people over while being gentle and rational and compassionate, that's cool. That's obviously preferable. Let's see. Somebody, I won't mention his name, somebody's in the National Guard and an anarchist. Incidentally, about 800,000 years ago, I took the entrance exam for being in the National Guard when I was a statist, obviously. And I did really well, and they said, oh, you can be anything. You could be a helicopter pilot. And I have no idea why. I was totally a pro-authoritarian. I was limited government, but I was totally an authoritarian statist. And so I thought, rah, rah for the police and the military, and something in me just said, don't, for some reason. And I won't pretend it was anything wise or anything. I don't know why. But I went to the process of taking the exam, and they said, yeah, I would really like to have you. And something in me said, no. Alrighty, so that Mitch saying, cop friend from high school, there's a war on cops. Guess who started it? Let's see. Robin asked about the Pennsylvania Candles in the Dark. It will, I'm pretty dang sure, almost totally sure, it'll be in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, which is suburbs of Philly. And it will be in July. I don't know exactly when yet. And that venue isn't totally nailed down, but it was pretty dang close last I heard. So let's see, there's tons of comments pouring in. I could go forever, but maybe I will just pipe down because I covered enough. And so yeah, there are some random thoughts. Oh, last thing, Mark says come to Toronto. I'm actually trying to, and there's a good chance that I will at some point. So that one isn't set. I don't know when that'll be yet. In the dead of winter up in Canada, so we can all die of frostbite in December. Thomas saying he's retired, active Army veteran, knows to experience how hard the indoctrination is to shed. Yeah, people love to imagine that in that situation I would do the right thing. So you don't freaking know. Had I gone through that indoctrination, I don't know if I ever would have become an anarchist or paid any attention to them. I don't know, because when you have your mind that molded into this insanity, and I've said this before, I'm not just kissing butt here, I've said this before, when somebody has gone through that level of indoctrination and manages to get out of it, that really freaking impresses me. I'm not sure I could have done that. And to have started that far behind and that programmed into authoritarian mindset and to still get out, that's pretty freaking impressive. So, alrighty, so it keeps piling on. Settle down, man. Mention the most dangerous superstition. Yeah, I do. It's so funny. I keep almost stopping. It's so funny how often, like, there's a bazillion people out there. It's a big-ass world. And it's so funny how often I'll be talking to somebody and they're like, you wrote a book? And I have to remember, oh yeah, I'm randomly talking to random people in random places, and some of them have known me for 20 years and some of them have known me for 20 seconds. So yeah, I should sort of make it a point every once in a while to mention my books and videos and stuff. Yeah, I wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. And I also wrote a book called The Iron Web, which is currently out of print. The audiobook is available on larkenrose.com. The audiobook of The Most Dangerous Superstition is so close to being done. Somebody else did it for me, which is awesome, and there's one dumb little glitch. I send it in for review, and there's one stupid thing that has to be fixed, and I have to hurry and do that. So, yeah. But yes, for those who don't know, I do have a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition that you can find on Amazon or at larkenrose.com. And lots of people have told me it changed how they see the world and changed their life, which is pretty dang cool. It's by far the most important thing I've ever written. Probably will be the most important thing I ever write. Except maybe The Mirror, which isn't a book. It's a giant, weird, interactive thing. And if you look up Larken Rose The Mirror, you can see a trailer for it, and you can see how to, if you want to support that, and me working on that, because that's a gigantically huge project, biggest project I've ever done in my entire life. And when it's done, I'm giving it away to the whole world for free. So it's not like, I'm going to cash in on this one for sure. I'm going to not cash in at all. So if anybody wants to fling money at me so I can work on it more, that's cool. Because in the end, I'm unemployed with nothing to sell when I'm done The Mirror. All right, so I guess that's about it. And tempting me, all we need to do is convince 7 billion people to be ANCAPs. Actually, that's totally going to happen, because it's not convincing them of a philosophy, it's just showing them one lie that they need to give up. But maybe I'll do a different rant about that. Alrighty, so Patreon. Yeah, Barbara reminds me. I do have a Patreon account, and I do such a bad job of promoting it that most of the people who know me don't even know it exists. I will put, I guess in the description of this, I'll go back and add a link to my Patreon account. So, yeah. Alrighty, so that's enough random ranting for now.